What is up, everybody? This is Adam. Welcome back to Fouled Out. We are coming off of Super Bowl 57 this weekend, the Kansas City Chiefs victory over the Philadelphia Eagles. Great game. Great game. Gave us a ton to talk about this week. We're going to look at what our biggest takeaways were from the game and kind of where we're going next. And Matt is coming on in just a minute to help me break that down. But first, this is going to be probably the last football episode of the podcast until we get to the NFL draft. So, all-star game for the NBA is this weekend, and then we're probably going to start jumping into NBA starting next week. So football's been super fun. We're really looking forward to covering the NBA as well, and then we'll circle back around to the NFL in a couple months here. All right, let's go. All right, Matt is here, fresh off of Super Bowl 57. Matt, do you remember the game from this weekend? I know you were at the Super Bowl party.
Yeah, it certainly wasn't a 28-3 scenario.
No, this was actually an excellent game. I thought this was the best game of the playoffs so far.
Yeah, and it's the best Super Bowl we've had in several years, I would say.
Yeah, last year's was pretty great though too.
It was good. I am not gonna go out there and say it was like one of the best ones I've watched. But it was entertaining. It was good. Like there was a certain amount of suspense in it, but it wasn't as impactful as this one, I feel like. Didn't hit me quite on the same level as like Terrell Owens losing on a broken ankle and still having like 100 yards or whatever he put up. Like that, we've seen some pretty intense ones. That one was good. Just like maybe on like that second tier.
Yeah, this one was great. I thought this was the best one we've had since 28-3, the
Yeah.
aforementioned game. But I guess my problem with this one is that the game was so great all the way up
Yep.
until the end.
Yep.
And that now we have to have this like one of the all-time great Super Bowls, or what could have been one of the all-time great Super Bowls, marred by the holding call.
Maybe the lesson from that should be a part-time employee shouldn't average 200,000 a year.
I mean, I wish I could be part-time and average 200,000
Right.
a year.
But like if you're a part-time employee, you're probably not very good at your job, which is the standard for the refs, regardless of what Roger Goodell says. Because that was not called all game long. We can really argue that there shouldn't be consistency from one game to another. What is and isn't holding, what is and isn't pass interference, stuff like that. But we know that happens. So all we're really asking for is that you are consistent within a game. And to have your most inconsistent moment be at the very end of a game that essentially seals the game, like that's inexcusable.
Yeah, I think the NFL kind of screwed themselves on this one too, because think about what happens if they don't make that call.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm pretty sure everybody knows what we're talking about by now, but obviously the holding call on James Bradbury near the end of the game that
Yeah.
gave the Chiefs a first down and let them basically kneel out the clock and kick the game-winning field goal with very little time left.
Yeah.
If you don't have that call, they have to kick a field goal to go up 38-35 and give Jalen Hurts and the Philadelphia Eagles the ball back with a little bit under 2 minutes left. And they got a couple timeouts, and now Philly is like trying to drive down to win the game. And all of a sudden we're looking at an epic finish to the Super Bowl instead of this kind of like awesome game that was all back and forth and so much fun that just kind of like peters out at the end.
It really just like leaves a sour taste in your mouth after a really, really delicious meal.
Yeah, I just kind of I think it's such a hard spot for the refs too, where it is a penalty, right? Like even James Bradbury admitted that he did it. He's like, yeah, I held his jersey. I was just hoping they would let it go. But like you said, the issue is more about the consistency of the refs, where That
Yep.
happened the entire game and they weren't
Hmm.
calling it. And then they finally do decide to call it at the end. And it's like, part of me wants to say, like, we can't have it both ways. Either the refs have to call everything to the book or everything has to be up to the ref's interpretation. But my real problem with refereeing, it comes in when it's like, okay, 90% of the game we did ref interpretation. And then at the very end here, we're going to do everything by the book.
Yeah. I mean, most of the game, the way they called that, I actually didn't have a problem with it because, yeah, if you're gonna go by like the letter of the rule, like, yeah, you could call it on almost every play. You look at what happened on that play, and did he really slow him down? Because you see the jersey move, but it's not like stretching. So, what kind of impact did that really have?
But that was the biggest issue, too. Like, if it was a pass that they just barely missed, then
Right.
I could see it. But like the ball was like thrown way out of bounds. Like there was no way that Juju Smith-Schuster catches that ball, even if he has a clean release from the line of scrimmage.
No.
Right? Like
No,
there's pressure
maybe
on
you can make
Mahomes.
an argument if it's Tyreek Hill, but outside of like that one instance, like the like that was going to be an incompletion no matter what.
No, and that's always been the problem with like pass interference. Is I feel like, I know it was defensive holding, but with pass interference, the rule book says that it has to be like a catchable ball.
Yeah.
And I feel like we're so quick to call penalties now and not pay attention to like the
Yeah.
context of the play. And I know that's a difficult thing for the ref to do, but when you're a professional referee who's making that much money and you're an NFL
Mm-hmm.
employee, we need to have people who can do that.
This is largely on the NFL and the competition committee too for not working on like changing the rule book to have like a sort of like common sense clause, right? Like if something is technically a flag by the letter of the rule, but it clearly has zero impact on the play, then throwing that flag, it's putting the ref center stage and taking away from actual football that's being played. And it's diminishing the product on the field.
It is. And it was just a bummer of a way to end a great game. But it is a game that I feel like there's a lot to take away from,
Mm-hmm.
even beyond just that call that ended it. And my first big thing that I'm kind of was looking at the end of this game is that Patrick Mahomes now in 5 years as a starter, he has 3 Super Bowl appearances, 2 Super Bowl wins, 2 Super Bowl MVPs, 2 regular season MVPs. Matt, do you know how many players in the history of the NFL have 2 Super Bowl rings, 2 Super Bowl MVPs, and 2 regular season MVPs?
I'm gonna go with two.
You're very close. It's 3.
Three.
Yep, it is Patrick Mahomes, Tom Brady, and Joe Montana.
Well, I just want Joe Montana to know that he really fucked up the consistency of the numbers and that he should be ashamed of himself.
Damn it, Joe. Uh,
We want more twos.
but even beyond that, 11 playoff wins ties him with Troy Aikman for 12th all time for a quarterback already. 35 playoff touchdown passes ties him for 8th all time, and then his 4,084 passing yards are 10th all time in the playoffs. He is now one of only 13 quarterbacks to have ever won multiple Super Bowls in the history of the NFL. I mean, it's hard to argue that this isn't the best start to a career that we've ever seen. Start throwing in like regular season yards and touchdowns and
Yeah,
where he ranks and how fast he's climbing.
he really is the perfect example of just how much the environment is important for a quarterback to develop in. I mean, he came out in the draft seen as a very volatile prospect, all the talent in the world, but very volatile. Didn't have to play all year one, he only played one game, I believe, or he at least only started one game. I would say that experience has probably proven to be pretty crucial for him. Getting to learn some of the basics from Alex Smith and having an entire year under Andy Reid before really needing to be a starter. And then once he is a starter, he gets to throw passes to Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce, two of the most dangerous weapons in the NFL, like for several years. And it wasn't until like what 3-4 years in the NFL when he started to struggle. And even his year where he struggled, and quite frankly, we were critical of him last year as well, is like still a really good year for almost any other quarterback. That foundation that he was able to start with put him in a position where he has that bad year. By the way, since this is audio only, air quotes on these things. He was able to take that experience where he has somewhat of a down year for him, and he had the foundation already to go back and make the appropriate corrections to his game. Because if you are in that place where you start out just trying to survive as a quarterback, you may not really have that reflective space ever. But that's the way you see quarterbacking, is you're just always fighting for survival, right?
Yeah, and it's interesting if you look at the draft that he was in, it's like a legitimate question to say, like, would he be or would he have the same start to the career that he's had if he was taken by someone like the Chicago Bears, who famously drafted Mitch Trubisky in front of him? Or like, would he have the same career if he was taken by the Houston Texans?
That is an understatement of what they did.
So
that is a massive understatement of what the Bears did.
Yeah, so it's definitely interesting to see like the level of his success that he has had. I mean, it's definitely environmentally based, but there's part of me that feels like he's that LeBron type player where like LeBron James was just going to be good at basketball no matter where he went. Like,
yes.
Would the level of success have been the same? Like if LeBron had gone somewhere better than Cleveland, could he have had like win a bunch of championships to start the career?
Here's where I push back on that, is that when it comes to being a superstar quarterback, that is 100 times more complicated than being a superstar NBA player. Because the most important thing to be a superstar NBA player is just having that raw physical talent that you can dominate everyone else with. But as a quarterback, like, there is more than twice as many players on an NFL field as there are on an NBA court. And defenses in the NFL can get so complicated. Like, yes, there's an element of Mahomes just having a mind that like operates at a higher level than a lot of other guys. That is more of a like uncut gem type of deal that still needed to be refined. And I don't know that it gets refined to the same precision if he is starting week one.
No, I mean, he's definitely not the same player if he doesn't land in Kansas City with Andy Reid.
Yeah. 100%. I still think he would have been a perennial starting quarterback, probably at the worst, like top 12 in the league, just based off of his physical abilities. It is that foundation that is putting him like even at his worst, we put him at like number 2 in our quarterback rankings. Like,
it's the foundation that has basically allowed him to have the best start to a career of any quarterback that we've ever seen. Right.
Yeah.
But I do think he would still have a good career in other situations.
Oh
It's
yeah.
just that like this is the perfect situation, for any quarterback, but specifically
Right.
like the perfect marriage between quarterback and coach and system and
Yep.
the players he's had. It's very, very
Yeah.
fortunate.
It just wouldn't have mattered if he was in Chicago. So
No. Uh, but the one thing I thought was kind of funny with Mahomes this week is that like, he wins his second Super Bowl MVP, and all of a sudden the like GOAT talk stuff is starting to come around
yep.
where you have a certain faction of people saying, is he the greatest quarterback of all time already? Basically.
Yeah.
And I just think we're so quick to these things nowadays where
Yeah.
everything, we want everything to be the greatest thing ever right away. Like we want this Super Bowl to be the best Super Bowl ever. We want this guy who's the best quarterback in the league to be the best quarterback ever. And we've seen like this hot take culture where everybody wants to be the first to everything. If any quarterback is ever going to get there eventually and surpass Tom Brady, it probably is Patrick Mahomes. Just because like statistically and from a wins perspective, he's had this start.
Yeah.
But my God, is the chasm between what Patrick Mahomes has accomplished and what Tom Brady has accomplished so big.
Yeah.
It is so huge. And you just think about
The
like,
Grand Canyon is jealous.
yeah,
Like,
and it's not to diss Patrick Mahomes, but like, think about the amount of luck that goes into winning one Super Bowl.
yeah.
So like the 49ers Super Bowl they won, they're basically one Jimmy G overthrow away from losing that game.
Right.
This Super Bowl they easily could have lost.
Oh yeah.
Tom Brady 7-3 in Super Bowls easily could have been 10-0. He also could have been like 2-8.
Mm-hmm.
Like he could have been anything in between. So from the like luck perspective, from the longevity perspective of having to do it as long as Tom Brady did it, I'm not anywhere close to being ready to have that conversation about Patrick Mahomes.
Yeah.
And I think if you are, I think you're being absolutely ridiculous.
I think it's ridiculous to even start having that conversation until he's like through his 10th year in the league. Like he's got to be like a veteran because like yeah, he is off to the best start anyone's ever had. Like it's really hard to argue otherwise. And like it is entirely possible, incredibly unlikely, but entirely possible something happens and he falls off a cliff. Right? Like it's possible, it's happened, astronomically unlikely, but possible. It's happened.
Well, it doesn't even have to be falling off a cliff from like a production perspective. Like he could just get hurt, right? Like we've seen guys have career-ending injuries, and so I'm saying like the longevity is part of it. And what I wrote down in my notes is 15 years from now, if he stays at the same pace, then I will be willing to have the conversation. And it may not even have to be that long, but
yeah,
I've always thought it was interesting with Tom Brady and the GOAT conversation.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like who was the GOAT before Tom Brady? Probably Joe Montana.
I think, Montana was the most common name thrown around. I think there was a small Marino sect, but I think those were kind of the two names that were thrown around.
I don't think I ever had a Brady versus Montana debate in my life. Like once Brady kind of assumed the GOAT mantle, I never had a conversation with someone where they were like, oh, well, he's not better than Montana. It was never the historic figures that brought the harshest arguments. It was always the contemporaries. It was always like Peyton Manning and Aaron Rodgers. It was always, oh, Tom Brady's not the GOAT. It's Peyton Manning. Oh, Aaron Rodgers is the best quarterback we've ever seen. And so I wonder with Mahomes, if he does get to that like rarefied air and he does eventually get to that position, if the debate is really going to be like, is it him versus Brady? Or are people going to be giving like, there's going to be like Burrow people who are like, oh, it's actually Burrow, or like it's actually Herbert or something like that.
I will say the biggest difference that I think we see now, though, is that, for lack of a better phrase, a cult of Tom Brady now, which is something we'd never really seen before for any other quarterback. So Mahomes could go on and win 13 Super Bowls and break every passing record, and there would be people out there that are like, yeah, but Brady's still the GOAT,
He never beat Tom
right?
Brady in a playoff game. So, no, you know what Tom Brady kind of reminds me of? I feel like this is a very apt comparison. Is that Tom Brady reminds me of Michael Jordan because in basketball, I kind of, and maybe it's just because I'm not old enough, but I feel like before Michael Jordan, there wasn't really a GOAT debate. It was like, oh yeah, like Larry Bird and Magic Johnson are up there.
Yeah,
Kareem's up there. There was kind of just like a couple guys. And it's like the same thing in football where it's like, yeah, Montana, Marino. I'm sure there's some people arguing for like Steve Young and maybe
hmm,
some other guys. And then this one figure comes out and just like, not like just absolutely dominates and takes the case for the GOAT. They're just like, oh, and
yeah,
everybody is just like, this guy is the GOAT. And then you have this next generation guy come. In basketball, it was LeBron James. And in
yeah,
football, it's starting to look like it might be Patrick Mahomes,
hmm,
where it's like super talented dude starts achieving a ton of stuff right away. And people are like, oh man, maybe this could be the guy that challenges the consensus GOAT. And I feel like we're starting to be in that same situation where like LeBron started achieving things in his career and
yeah.
people started making the case for him and maybe made it like too early. And that's going to now be the pressure on Patrick Mahomes the rest of his career. It's like, you got to live up to this GOAT status that everybody's arguing for you.
People really just need to allow a player's case to make it clear. Brady and Jordan, they came through and did what they did, and there was no argument. If you have to argue that another player has surpassed them, then they have not. It's as simple as that, because the whole thing about being the GOAT is that everyone knows it.
Yeah, the thing that I think people always get wrapped up in is who's the greatest of all time versus who is maybe more talented.
Yeah.
I Obviously Brady's the greatest quarterback of all time. I think we're at the
Hmm.
point where there's not even any debating that anymore.
Yeah.
But I think we've seen a lot of quarterbacks who are more talented than him, bigger arm,
Yeah, for
mobility.
sure.
They make the bigger wow plays that he didn't make. And I think that's where people start going like, this is the greatest quarterback I've ever seen. Look at this throw that he can make and blah, blah, blah.
Yep.
And to me, the case for greatest isn't about that. Greatest is like, what have you achieved? And are
Yeah.
you that dude? Uh,
Yeah.
and
Are you indomitable?
yeah. And Mahomes is definitely off to a good start. And like I said, I think
Yeah.
if anybody's ever going to
He
catch
is
Brady, that it would be him.
charging
But
in that direction.
yeah, so it'll be interesting to watch.
Yeah.
The other quarterback I wanted to touch on real quick was the quarterback on the other side, Jalen Hurts.
Oh, he played?
He did play. You wouldn't know it by listening to the media the last couple of days, but not only did he play, he played phenomenally.
He
Uh,
played extremely well.
he did 304 passing yards and a touchdown, another 70
Yeah.
rushing and 3 touchdowns.
Yeah.
We kind of hemmed and hawed on Jalen Hurts
Yeah.
all season this year, and it's like, yeah, like he's really good, but the schedule has been bad, and can he do it in the
Yep.
playoffs? And it just, I, I
Yeah.
think we're at the point where we've seen everything that we need to see from Jalen Hurts to be comfortable with Philadelphia moving forward with him as their franchise
Yeah.
quarterback.
He did everything that we asked of him. He didn't win it, but like he did everything else. And granted, like if they don't throw a flag that many of us are calling very questionable, he very well might have gone down the field and won the game, when we did our revised quarterback ranking, I mean, there wasn't much of a discussion about throwing Jalen Hurts in there, but there was still that feeling of like, man, like he could move dramatically in one direction or another in this. And like, I don't know that he's necessarily going to like cemented himself in like a top 5 position or anything, but he ain't dropping out of that top 10.
No, he's solidly in there. And I think
Yeah.
we're going to have a real conversation on the quarterback list about where does he go with like Lamar Jackson and guys who have not had playoff success when, he just made a Super Bowl and played at a Super Bowl MVP level.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you never win the MVP if your team loses. But that was a game where I was kind of like, man, Mahomes got it because he was the quarterback of the winning team, but I could have seen them giving it to Jalen Hurts, even though his team lost.
Right.
Because man, was he was so great.
Yeah, he was kind of in that same position as LeBron was when he lost that finals to the Warriors, when it was like almost putting up like a 40-point triple-double every night. It's a bummer to see someone put up a performance like that and lose and then not get the award that they probably deserved. But hey, like, hats off. We were skeptical. Shit, I've even been critical at times. And I am willing to say Jalen Hurts is here, and he is more than a good quarterback.
The thing that really blows me away about Jalen Hurts and I guess the Eagles offense in general, they just seemed completely unstoppable in short yardage situations.
Yeah.
Like every single time it got down to like 3rd and 3 or 4th and 2 or whatever, I was like, they're going to pick this up. And they easily like could have won this game. And there was a point in the game where I thought they were going to run away with it. They were up 14-7. They have the ball and they're just like converting everything. And they're completely unstoppable on the ground. They're doing that quarterback push play on 4th down, and they just keep converting and converting and converting. And then Jalen Hurts has, unfortunately for him, also the biggest miscue of the game.
Yeah.
Dropping that fumble that Bolton returned for a touchdown and making it 14-14.
Yeah.
I just felt like part of me feels like that was the game right there.
Yeah.
Because I was like watching it, and as someone who bet on the Chiefs and picked the Chiefs on this podcast, I was like, man, if the Eagles score here, this might actually be over at 21-7. It was feeling that way because you barely saw Patrick Mahomes in the first half.
That like series of events there was really interesting for me with him, because like that fumble was 100% nerves, right? Like it had to be, because he was untouched. He literally just dropped the ball. An extremely weird fumble. And the question after something like that happens is, okay, well, how is he going to respond to that? Like, first ever Super Bowl, kind of had a soft playoff schedule, wasn't really challenged, comes back out on the field and almost immediately throws a pick. That ball probably should have been picked off. It looked really bad. It was really easy in that moment to be like, ah, shit, well, now he's rattled. And this is where it starts. But to his credit, like, after that throw, like, he really turned it around. And granted, it's also helpful to turn it around when you have AJ Brown, because he made some incredible catches in that game. There's been a lot of quarterbacks in a lot of high pressure situations that they make their big mistake and they can't put it together to make the big plays and make the tight window throws. And Jalen Hurts did it. And that's not a small accomplishment. Like, that's big stuff that is top 10 NFL quarterback stuff.
Yeah, that was the great thing about this game, kind of in a nutshell, was just the twists and turns and like it's 14-7 and then he fumbles. And then it's like, oh man, he's shook. The Chiefs are going to take over. But then somehow the Eagles go up 24-14 at half. And it's like, oh my God, the Patrick Mahomes now has to try to come back from a double-digit deficit, which is pretty rare for quarterbacks in the Super Bowl.
It's also his wheelhouse.
Right. Well, it's his wheelhouse, but I was going to say it's rare for quarterbacks in the Super Bowl who are not named Tom Brady to do that. So,
yeah. I mean, it's just like
it's back and forth. And then the Chiefs are up 8, but Eagles score and get the conversion. Oh my God. It was just such a fun game, and the back and forth of it all and the roller coaster ride was so enjoyable.
Yeah. I don't know if there's really many positions that I'm like less comfortable in than ahead of Patrick Mahomes by multiple scores. Like,
what about behind Patrick Mahomes by multiple scores?
I at least know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
I can resign myself to that one.
For Jalen Hurts right now, like you brought up the top 10 quarterbacks list. I haven't taken the time to go back and like really think about where I'd put him.
Yeah, that's a later problem.
Yeah, that's going to be a later podcast. But what I did think of is like, I think there are only 3 quarterbacks who I'm 100% taking in front of him right now, where I'm like, there's not even a debate, and it's Mahomes, Allen, and Burrow.
Yeah.
And then after that, it's like, I think there's a debate. Like, we had Herbert up there.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about Lamar Jackson.
Yeah.
After that, it's like I'm starting to get into debate territory. So I think that's pretty.
That
says a lot after where we had him to start the season and then where we had him even at the end of the season.
Was arguably the best player in the NFL all year long. Obviously, Mahomes won the MVP, but man, like.
But if Hurts hadn't gotten injured, he probably would have won the MVP.
Yeah, if not for that shoulder injury, it's hard to see him not winning that.
Yeah, so you think about a guy who potentially could have been MVP. We don't know how much that shoulder injury affected him in the first couple rounds of the playoffs, or like maybe they just didn't lean on him as much because they didn't have to in the first couple rounds.
Yeah.
But when they needed him most, he was phenomenal.
Yeah.
My other big takeaway was that were the 49ers right about the Eagles defense?
Here's my thing. They took a lot of shots at Jalen Hurts too. So I'm kind of taking everything they said with like less than a grain of salt.
That's fair, but the Eagles defense was one of the best all season. They were number 1 against the pass statistically and in like DVOA. They had 70 sacks this year, which is the 3rd most all time for a defense.
Yeah.
And they give up 31 in the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
They don't sack Mahomes once. Not once. And they only get 7 pressures. So I know that they were complaining about the turf, and they were saying that like the field was a big issue for them and they couldn't get a push and like a pass rush because of the field. But man, they just, especially in the second half where the Chiefs scored they scored a touchdown on every possession in the second half.
Yeah.
And then a field goal on the last one. So you don't get a single stop in the second half, and you're just getting torched all over the field by this Kansas City offense. There was a part of me that's like, man, maybe the 49ers really did see something in this Eagles defense and just couldn't attack it because they didn't have a quarterback. And then there's another part of me that's just like, God, the 49ers are the whiniest group of guys I've ever met in my life.
Yeah, that's more where I'm at. We've talked at other points on this podcast how like every team just has one of those days where either the team doesn't show up, or one of their units just has an off day. And I think that there's probably a combination there of like yeah, the field wasn't great and they kind of didn't have their best day. And Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs had 2 weeks to prepare for this defense that they knew had 70 sacks this season. So they probably had somewhat of a plan for that. And we talked about the fact that Mahomes has been playing his best football of his entire career this year. Well, you as a Patriots and Brady fan, like, know as well as anyone, part of being the best quarterback in the NFL is knowing, yeah, like they get after the passer. So I need to know where all my hot reads are. I need to know, hey, I've got 1.5 at tops 2 seconds to get this ball out. Like constantly stay on schedule so that that defensive line can't do what it does. And I'm not going to sit here and say that he did that on every single play because it's Patrick Mahomes, right? Like when he needs to run around and be a magician, he's going to do it. But sustaining drives that way and just getting snap after snap of them not being able to get to the quarterback as the ball gets out is a really good way to take some of the bite out of that defense because they're expending energy over and over again with nothing to hang their head on.
It's tough. And I just think that like Andy Reid's game plan for them was pretty much like chef's kiss perfect.
Yeah.
Like there was so many plays and so many instances of the Chiefs using the Eagles' aggressiveness against them
Yep.
and getting exactly what they wanted because of it. And then like
Yeah.
they're hammering them with Pacheco, and then like I thought Andy Reid had a phenomenally coached game, especially in the second half. I really felt like
Yeah.
they looked at what was going on in the first half and they were like, okay, we're going to make these adjustments, and it showed. It showed because the Eagles defense looked like they were completely outclassed in the second half. That kind of takes me to my last big takeaway, and that's like we talk about this every year, is that this is a copycat league, and that
Mm-hmm.
whenever a team wins a championship, we're going to see teams copy certain aspects of what they've done. So, like with the Rams, we saw the Rams kind of go all in, trading all their picks for the Super Bowl last year. And that led to like the Broncos trading for Russell Wilson and all sorts of like teams basically trading away tons of picks that they never would have traded away before for wide receivers and quarterbacks and all
Mm-hmm.
sorts of stuff. And I was trying to think about like looking at these two teams, what kind of things can you copy from them?
Mm-hmm.
Because you can't copy Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce.
Nope.
You can't just be like, that's our plan, is we're just going to have the best quarterback in the league and one of the most unique weapons in NFL history. And you can't just copy like Jalen Hurts. But one of the things I saw in the second half that I think we're going to see a lot more of next season is that route that Kadarius Toney and Sky Moore scored touchdowns on, where they like line up as an outside receiver and go in motion quickly. But then as soon as they hit the offensive line, basically, the ball is snapped and they like retrace back to where they just came from.
Yeah.
They were, every time they did that, they were wide open.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, it's just such a good example of using the Eagles' aggressiveness against them.
Every year, those guys coming out in the draft who maybe aren't the most polished receivers, but they are these fast and super quick, twitchy athletes who can do stuff like that. So, like, obviously, Kansas City did not feel comfortable running with Sky Moore as like a mainstay of their offense this year. But they definitely found a way to use what he can offer in the biggest game of the year. And other teams can probably find a way to use similar players more frequently because they don't have a Patrick Mahomes to rely on. They need more gadgety stuff to get themselves yards and big plays.
I probably could have scored on that route.
Seriously.
Honestly, the big problem with it was like the wide receiver is motioning in, and so the corner for the Eagles is looking at that and being like, "Oh shit, he's gonna run a drag, and
Yeah.
he's gonna go across, and I can't, I got to get a head start on that because I can't get there.
Yep.
Like I'm not fast enough to get there with like a Kadarius Toney or a Sky Moore, and so
Mm-hmm.
they're already going one way, and so for you to bounce out the other way is just I don't think there was anything the Eagles could have done to stop that. And I
Yeah.
bet you any amount of money that we see that as like an option route next season in the NFL by a lot of teams.
Yeah. And like as a corner, when especially if you're a man on that, like when you're getting ready to come in and like cover that drag, like you also kind of have to like peel back off and away from the line of scrimmage more. Otherwise you're, plowing into your teammates and like setting a pick yourself. So that peeling away from the line of scrimmage also is creating even more separation, even if you are able to redirect your body.
Yeah. And if that wasn't bad enough, what they were doing is motioning to come behind Travis Kelce and go back out. And so now it's like you're not even just worried about the one guy. Like
Yeah.
Kadarius Toney's touchdown, he comes in and they snap the ball and Travis Kelce runs pretty much like a vertical route. And
Yeah.
both guys on the Eagles stayed with Kelce. And part of that's because it's like impossible for them to get back out to Toney at that point, but also it's just like it's Travis freaking Kelce. So
Mm-hmm.
I bet we see that. We might see more of like the running back pushing the quarterback on short downs, like short yardage downs.
Yeah.
But I I think we're going to be seeing that until a quarterback basically like breaks their back, because
Yep.
there was one play in the Super Bowl because like the Eagles kept doing that, right? They got their short yardage formation
Yeah.
and the running backs are pushing Hurts as if Hurts wasn't already strong enough.
Right.
But to try to stop it, Chris Jones went over the top against it. And it's like, okay, eventually you're going to have this like brick wall that the quarterback's running into. You're going to have a running back pushing him in the back, and you're going to have a 300-pound defensive lineman also jumping at your head.
Yeah.
And something really bad is going to happen to somebody, and that's going to be the end of that.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
And my only other thing was that I think the Super Bowl outlined how replaceable running backs are
Yep.
because Kansas City mostly used Pacheco, who was a 7th-round pick.
Mm-hmm.
You also saw some McKinnon, who they basically got for free.
Yeah.
Philly just like speaking of like the chef's kiss, like this was the ultimate Nick Sirianni hates Miles Sanders game.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
He basically was like, Miles Sanders had a fumble early in the game that went out of bounds. And after that point, we basically didn't see Miles Sanders again until they left him for dead on that swing route that also
Yep.
almost was a fumble return for a touchdown. But even aside from him, so like they hardly used him. He only had a couple touches. Kenneth Gainwell's a 5th-round pick. Boston Scott's a 6th-round pick who's been there forever. And I say all this to say that Bijan Robinson is in the draft this year, the running back from Texas. And he's at least the best running back prospect we've seen since Saquon Barkley. And I am going to absolutely lose my shit on this podcast if someone spends a top 15 pick on him.
Yeah.
I will go ballistic.
Yeah. I mean, we can legitimately argue that you shouldn't even use a 1st-round pick on him. I'm less upset about like a 25 to 31 pick, but so at least then like then those teams obviously have fewer needs, but man, like honestly ask yourself, how much more, like percentage wise, is Bijan Robinson going to give you more than Isaiah Pacheco did?
Yeah,
And it's like,
I think you can just find running backs basically anywhere.
yeah.
So spending like a premium pick on one will never
Mhm.
not drive me crazy. Like I
Yeah.
said this when the Steelers drafted Najee Harris, and when the Jaguars drafted Travis Etienne. You can find these guys almost anywhere. Like all throughout the draft, you can basically pull them off the scrap heap in the NFL. I mean, for God's sakes, Josh Jacobs and Miles Sanders are both going to be free agents this summer. And if either of them gets paid, I will lose it. And if Bijan Robinson is a high first round pick, I will also lose it. Like I've
Yeah.
seen him mocked as high as 9.
The one he finally got the ball this year, because obviously there's Christian McCaffrey. Deontay Foreman proved to be a very, very good running back this year. Carolina Panthers were his third NFL team. And I believe he is also set to be a free agent this year. And it's like, even these guys that have failed other places, like, can prove to be very, very good for you. You just keep throwing low value resources at running back and you'll get something that works eventually.
Yeah, I mean, from my team's perspective, the the Patriots drafted Ramondre Stevenson with like a 4th round pick, and
Yeah.
he just finished the season with the fourth most total yards any Patriots ever had,
Yeah.
which is kind of crazy with how shitty our season was. But
Yeah.
yeah, I just running back is super replaceable. They obviously like didn't need them that much in this game with Jalen
Right.
Hurts carrying the ball on Philly. And then I thought like Pacheco had a good game, won me a bunch of money because I had Pacheco's rushing over.
Right.
But Pacheco was a 7th round pick this season. Like, why are we spending 1st round picks on Clyde Edwards-Helaire when we can get Pacheco in the 7th?
Right.
Do you have any other Super Bowl thoughts that we wanted to talk about real quick?
Mine are a little bit more like team building than your route running stuff. But so obviously going out and spending the picks and the money to get AJ Brown was a major success. And I think that we're now going to see teams that have quarterbacks who haven't quite had the success that they would like to have seen from them, but still kind of believe in them, go out and target wide receivers that are maybe potentially available or not particularly happy where they are. Yeah, there's been talk about maybe DeAndre Hopkins potentially being a target for a number of teams. Like that is one of those things that I think teams are going to see is this is how we can raise the floor of our offense as long as they're on the field. It just nothing not trying to take anything away from the season that Jalen Hurts has had because he's earned that respect. But let's call it what it is. Like he would have at least somewhat of a lesser season if AJ Brown was not there, because even the best quarterbacks take a step back when they don't have an elite wide receiver.
For sure. I mean, unless your name is Patrick Mahomes.
Right.
Chiefs kind of did the opposite, but they
Yeah.
still have
Even
Kelsey.
even he though, like statistically it was a step back, but like he got better while his, flashy stats maybe dulled a little bit.
Yeah, but I don't even think that's a shot at Jalen Hurts, though. It's just the fact that,
No.
like, adding that elite weapon is what allowed him to take the next step
Yeah.
forward in his development.
Yep.
And I think you look at some teams that might have struggling young quarterbacks,
Yep.
and that maybe they look at it and go, like, okay, instead of having to completely switch out our quarterback, maybe we go out and get one of
Yeah.
these big time weapons to help with his
Yeah.
development instead.
Yeah. Or maybe not a struggling young quarterback, although I think this is incredibly unlikely because I'm pretty sure this quarterback has decided I am not playing here ever again. Let's say the Baltimore Ravens do decide to pay Lamar Jackson. They finally got rid of Greg Roman. The best way to make this new offense work is to go out and get him that number one wide receiver, which also makes every wide receiver they currently have on their roster better in their role because they don't have to ever step in as the number one.
It'll be interesting to see what types of packages NFL teams throw at receivers. I haven't seen what the prop is yet, but I'm going to bet the over on receivers taken in the first and second round in the NFL draft. Again, because we had about $1 billion last year. And it just seems to be such a point of emphasis.
Yeah.
I also saw a news story today saying that teams are sniffing around Deebo Samuel as well because he might want to leave San Francisco, which I thought was pretty interesting.
That is interesting. Yeah. The other thing that I think might be a like catching on type of trend, but it is an exclusive group of teams that might buy into it. We saw Patrick Mahomes struggle last year, and then they trade Tyreek Hill. The Chiefs didn't go out and get another superstar wide receiver. I mean, yes, he's still a Travis Kelce, right? But every other wide receiver they brought in was just a good player, right? Someone that you can depend upon. They're going to be where they are, where they need to be, when they need to be there. And yeah, there was a little bit of like big play potential there with MVS, but like other than that, they were not really going for anything flashy. And it turns out that if you have an elite quarterback, like, yeah, sure, it certainly helps to have wide receivers that can make really, really big plays, but you don't need it. You just need guys who are going to be where they're supposed to be when they need to be there because the quarterback's going to make the right play. You might see some of these teams that have like a Burrow or Herbert, like Josh Allen, while maybe not get rid of the weapons that they have, run their offense in a not necessarily a more conservative way, but just a more methodical way. That is truly what worked for Mahomes. Was he was methodical. He wasn't conservative. He was methodical. And unless you disrupted his method, you weren't going to stop him.
Yeah, my team tried that method with a not elite quarterback this year, and it was awful.
Yeah.
So make sure you have an elite quarterback. But
yeah, it again only works with quarterbacks that are special.
Yeah, and you specifically touched on the team that I'm most interested to see, and we'll talk about this a little bit more next week. But the Cincinnati Bengals, what do they do with T. Higgins? Where you have this elite weapon you have to make a decision on.
Yeah.
Do you let him go or do you trade him and use that capital and that money to invest in other positions along your offense, similar to what the Chiefs did? Or do you try to run back what you did this year and see where it goes? So, yeah, but we'll talk a little bit more about the offseason next week. And then we're also going to dive into some NBA stuff to kick off our NBA coverage. But that is it for us for today. As always, Fouled Out can be found on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Pocket Cast, Overcast, anywhere you get your podcast. You can hit us up on Twitter at Fouled Out Sports. You can find Matt on Twitter at Matador_defense. And you can find our videos on TikTok at Fouled Out Sports Podcast. It's a long name, but you can't miss it. Matt, great football season.
Yeah,
Super fun doing this over the last like 22 weeks together. Capped off by a excellent game and just a shitty call to end our NFL season, which just seems very apt for the season that we just had.
I can't think of anything more Roger Goodell.
Just great football ruined by bad reffing. That was the theme of the season, really. So
the last like 4.
Yeah. Like I said, we'll be back next week. We're going to do a little bit NFL next week, a little bit NBA, little hodgepodge podcast to transfer our coverage over to the NBA season. And then we're on to NBA at least until the NFL draft in a couple months.
Are you not going to talk about and celebrate your betting victories with the fans?
I wasn't going to rub it in everybody's faces, but I made out like a bandit this week. Unbelievable. I hit everything to end the NFL season.
And you know what? Like as much as I love these burgers dancing around behind me, I think that we need to celebrate a little bit more than that.
That is not a Whopper.
Well, it's a Whopper of a kind.
Whopper, 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 Whopper. Something Flame Pro, something Whopper. All right, my friend. I will see you soon, and we will see you guys later.
Have fun, everyone.
All right. Bye, guys.
Bye, Robin.
Bye, Mom.